Now, we thank our speakers for being willing at the end of the day to answer some questions. So we're happy to take any from the audience right now. Oh, you were too quick with your hands. We'll have to have them again. Yes, lady over here.
My name is George Smith. I'm Secretary of the Odd Watch KSX. And I'm just making an observation. As well as the ghastly cost of 3,500 young men who lost their lives in Bomber Command, it is worth noting that approximately another 3,000 Australian airmen lost their lives in the other commands and the Special Executive Operations and 2nd Tactical Air Force. So it's worthwhile remembering that the total loss is 6,500 Australian airmen who lost their lives in the European War.
Thank you, George. Thanks for reminding me of those. Any more questions from the floor at this stage? Yes, just behind you there.
To Peter Stanley, could you comment on the post-war strategic bombing survey in the context of what we've been hearing today?
Yes, indeed. Thanks. It's Mike, isn't it? Yeah. Both Britain and the US wanted to know whether it had been worthwhile, and they both created strategic bombing surveys which toured Germany and asked questions. For example, they interrogated German industrialists and military leaders and measured the effect of the bombing. And they came up with some fairly disappointing conclusions, also ambiguous conclusions, and people have been arguing about them for the past 63 years. And that I think it used to be that it was regarded as a disappointment, then there was a counter-offensive that said it succeeded. I think the pendulum's now taken the view that the bomber offensives were worthwhile. But the fact is the bombing surveys are massive amounts of evidence that really deserve someone to go through them again, so the pendulum will no doubt swing back. But it's a great topic that really ought to be explored in greater detail. Thanks, Mike.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Jane Roberts-Billett. I have something to contribute about the morality of the bombing campaign, which maybe people are not aware of. I have a school friend whose parents came from Germany in 1938. They left to England, they did their medical training there, and then subsequently came to Australia just pre-war. And fairly, well, the last 10 years they went back to Germany, to Hamburg, where the family came from, and her aunt commented, "We always thanked the bombing raids. At least we knew the Gestapo were going to be visiting." So I'll just put that in. The other question I have is, or a question in general, is that I have a lot of trouble coping with the numbers of the dead. I've worked it out. I think Hank Nelson in Chased by the Sun estimates that 7.3% was the casualties in Bomber Command, which, when you look at the numbers, obviously the numbers are huge. But I've also done the Yachtsman scheme, which were the Australians who volunteered to serve in the Royal Navy. And although there are only 500 of them and there were 37 casualties, that works out to be about 7%. I don't know, can anybody give me, my question is, you know, there seems to be a lot of variation about the numbers concerned.
Thanks. Here's a little something I prepared earlier. I was going to talk about numbers in my keynote, but I decided to leave it till now. Jan, I think you're right to say that the numbers need looking at. Different people have come up with different numbers, and lots of people, I mean, indeed, we've heard different figures through the day. I think it needs to be sorted out, and without forgetting that every single one of those statistics means an individual tragedy, I think we need to go back and find out, by looking at the individual files, who served in Bomber Command and other commands, and who died, where and when. And we can do it these days because all the individual files are available. We've got the technology, but I think we've been using rubbery figures for 70 years, and we've got to stop doing it and figure out exactly how many died and in what circumstances and get the figures right. And it's something that some young scholar
should take up.
No pressure, no pressure. Thank you. If only we knew a young scholar somewhere. Next question. We have an eminent panel.
My name's Alan Hume. I grew up in the Air Force. My father joined the Air Force in 36 and started in Coastal Command through a 6th Squadron and then ended up in 550 Squadron flying Lancasters. Shortly after the war, we moved to Germany as part of 2nd TAF. And I spent 4 years in Germany, and all the people I met who were Germans were very friendly towards us and very appreciative of the fact that we got rid of Herr Hitler.
And do you have a question at all?
No, I just wanted to make that comment because I think it's quite important. One other comment I would make was...
Could I ask you to hold the comment perhaps till the end, if you wouldn't mind, till we've covered some other questions. Thank you. If you could just keep your comments to questions, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Alan.
So thank you, John. Professor Stanley, you made reference to the Battle for Australia. I think it's your presentation. I've got the impression that you seem to imply that there was no threat to Australia. I seem to recall the Japanese shillings, Australian denomination, and also I just wonder if you could comment on what would have happened had the Battle of Coral Sea gone the other way.
Yeah, all right. Let's deal with those two things, which aren't relevant to this conference, but let's knock them on the head straight away. There was no Japanese invasion money printed for Australia. Are there any numismatists in the house? If coin collectors will tell you, and you can see the banknotes in the Australian War Memorial and other places, none of them were printed in the expectation of conquering Australia. There was, when the Japanese conquered somewhere, then they printed money. They did that for Malaysia, the Philippines, and then the East Indies and the British South Pacific possessions. But they didn't print any money in the expectation of invading Australia because there were no plans. And if the Japanese had won the Battle of the Coral Sea, they would certainly have invaded Papua New Guinea, as they were planning to. And it's quite possible that they would have gone on to attack the Australian mainland. But the fact is they didn't in the Battle of the Coral Sea, and they never planned to invade the Australian mainland. But, you know, it's a detail. We should keep it in proportion, in perspective. That's, to me, that's the only sensible way to look at that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, certainly. Sorry.
So I might just add to that response, get off the hook a little bit. During the Second World War, the Japanese were quite surprised with the speed and success of their invasion. And they did get together with Army, Navy and the government and looked at the possibility of extending the perimeter of their area of occupation. They calculated the number of divisions they would need to invade Australia, and the Army said, we don't have the troops to spare. The Navy quickly chimed in and said, well, we don't have the ships to support the area that we occupy now, let alone the ships that we would need to first occupy Australia and then maintain the logistics reach back to sustain them in those operations anyway. So really the whole concept of an invasion of Australia was, as far as the Japanese were concerned, was just a non-starter from the very beginning. The Japanese had won the Battle of the Coral Sea. They simply would have achieved what they had wanted to all along, and that was to cut the sea lanes between Australia and the US. They weren't going to extend beyond that at all.
There's no truth in rumor they thought they'd own the Gold Coast 50 years later anyway, Mark, is that right? Question here.
Thank you. Xavier, your paper was extremely well received here. Question for the panel. The expansion in the Australian War Memorial of the Bomber Command exhibitions, Striking by Night is but one. There is another one designed for the younger generation in the simulated bomber mission. What's the feedback that historians are getting now, and other academics are getting, and the education system getting on the effect of the younger people that are visiting the War Memorial and their appreciation and understanding of what Bomber Command was all about?
So the question is, young people visiting the War Memorial, in particular focusing on Bomber Command.
Can I just say, just speaking from people of my own sort of age, I think undoubtedly I'm about 5 or 6 years out of high school, and we regularly go on these field trips to the Melbourne Shrine of Remembrance and War Memorials, and just the level of respect that I think younger people have for it is growing. And like I sort of studied in my paper, it's growing a lot. But there's definitely a divide of people who are looking to do it in the proper manner. That is, having the understanding that this is we should respect and honour the people who have fought, but also that war is not something that we want to continue and want to revel in. So there's a lot of people like that who attend the dawn services, and then there is also the side that goes to Gallipoli and things like that, and drinks and parties on the beaches and does those sorts of things, which I can guarantee that from the people that I know, the majority do it in the right way. There's that small portion who do it the wrong way. So I think the biggest thing is to continue educating, especially in school, the right way to go about honouring them. And I think that it's getting better as long as it doesn't go a bit too overboard.
Question from the Chair. We've heard about the Empire Training Scheme, and my understanding is that at the beginning of the war, Menzies and Bruce decided that Australia would not send its own independent air force, but instead would be subsumed into the Empire Training Scheme and the British forces as such. Did that perhaps cause difficulty, meaning that most of the very highly trained and experienced men were overseas, and our own RAAF was handicapped severely as a result? I guess we'd value some comment from people here.
I believe so. I think the stories that exist of the conflict between the regular officers and the new recruits and those already in England training, they were extreme in their conflict. Now, there are others here, Peter, you might know more about that, what the reaction was between the regular Australian Air Force officers and those new men coming in and rising up. There's some terrible stories I know of jealousy that particularly with the appointment of British officers over the Australian crews and officers.
Question dealt with the tensions between the men who come in through the Empire Air Training Scheme and those who are already in the service.
I don't think there was any particular tension between them at all.
I have to disagree. The Australians were very slow in being promoted in their crew positions. They were very slow in being made officer ranks in the 31st stages.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, question. Microphone come.
In regard to your question, I recall that I think the name was Air Commodore Ashmore, wrote a book, published a book under the auspices of Canberra, How Not to Run an Air Force, the book was called. And he goes into it in considerable detail.
We just have time for a few more. There's a couple more questions.
Yes, I wonder if these two graduates from the EATS scheme, the panel, could give us some report on the effectiveness of the current training that they received and the quality It was all put together very quickly. I just wonder how it worked from there point of view.
Quality of training received in the EBAT or how you rate it?
I was astonished at how well I was trained, and I didn't really understand just what the quality was until during that year I spoke about, when I was waiting to go to operational training and flew Tiger Moths and then airspeed Oxfords. When we were flying the Oxfords in Gloucestershire, a Flying Fortress landed at Aerodrome, and the duty officer, top RAF, came down looking all spick and span, waiting for the crew to come over to him from where they parked their craft. They came as a tremendous straggle, and the leading voice said, "Say, where are we?" And I thought, my God. We'd gone to England and found certainly that it was difficult to map read because there were so many roads and railways and rivers and God knows what to identify, just map reading. But by the time, a few months later, I was operational training, my navigator had the G-box and could tell me when I was over the end of the runway. And I thought, what's wrong with American training? And there are many stories about American navigation that was incompetent, to say the least. So I believe, and of course at Penella I had Ian Johnson, Mac Holton, and a lot of very lively instructors. Now where have we got all those from? They suddenly appeared out of the blue. The scheme worked wonderfully well. And I'd like to comment, if I may, while I have the microphone, that I think that Suzanne's emphasis on the Empire Air Training Scheme gives the feeling that it ought to be remembered. But in a way, that was the training, and then became the Empire Air Force, if you like. And we were all involved in the one thing. And I don't remember myself as a member of EATS. I remember myself as a member of the RAAF. And I think all of us identified with our national force.
An indication of how good our training was I was at initial training school at Bradfield Park, and marching up and down we were called to halt. And after we were called to halt, the officer in charge, whose name was Pilot Officer Redhead, stopped in front of me and said, "Isaacson, your appearance is bad and your marching is worse." So it gives you a good indication of how good our training was.
This is a story from my father. He said that the Americans flew during the day because they couldn't find their way home at night time.
And I heard said, what can you expect from a country where its discoverer Columbus set out not knowing where he was going, and when he got there he didn't know where he was, and when he got back he didn't know where he'd been.
My question is for Peter Isaacson, and I'd like to jump up to the philosophical level. Can you hear this okay, Peter? No? I haven't asked. Can you hear it? Can you hear that?
No.
Oh.
You just asked the question. You're doing that. The other don't make it too big.
No. I just wanted to really take advantage of your experience and your magnificent lifetime and all the things that you've seen and done. And when I think back to the campaign that you participated in, it's the closest that humanity has ever come to total war. There was, very few boundaries on what could or could not be done. And not long after your experiences, we dropped atomic bombs, and then we've all grown up and lived through Cold War, and all those weapons are still out there somewhere. Not necessarily poised as they were, but they're still there. And I'm just wondering, when you look back over your life, and you look back at the experience of war over the 20th century, do you think that humanity has learned some lessons and that we will not return back to a total war situation? Or do you think that we're still stupid enough to potentially do that at some point in the future?
I think we're still stupid.
Excellent.
I think we're still stupid
You
enough.
know, all today has talked about the perils of war, the dangers of war, but I think all of us who are here, who have served, will recognise that in our lifetime, it's been an experience in our lifetime that one could never comprehend, or people who have not served would not really understand. And I thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about our life in Bomber Command, and those of us that did live have got something to be thankful for. And despite everything that has been said, we do appreciate what the public do give us on Anzac Day and on other times when there is a commemoration. So very pleasing to us. Don't you think so?
I'd love to answer that question. As a historian, will we do it again? For goodness sake, we're bound to, I think. Look at what we did, the West, going into Iraq. Can you believe that anybody had any sense at all of the nature of the Middle East would do that? And then going to Afghanistan, where the history had told us, time after time, it's a tribal, dislocated, impossible to command nation. They'll do it again. And we're all involved because we're all quiescent when things like that happen.
Thank you. We've just got time for 2 more questions. Second last question.
My question is not as deep as the previous one, but more curious than anything. My father, who served in Halifax's at Snape and Polkington, Odd Bod tail gunner, didn't talk once again much about his experiences. And as an older person now, I'm very curious about my father's past and doing a lot of delving and investigating. I was just really curious. He started off being recruited into the army, and then 6 months later, he was then shipped off overseas to go into the aircraft. And at 6'4", became a tail gunner. I could not understand how he ever got in there, or why they selected him. He must have been a good shot or something, I don't know. But I'm just curious to know the transition from 1 minute you're in the army doing some sort of training, and then next minute you're with the ANPI training scheme preparing for overseas aircraft. How does that happen, and did that happen to yourselves?
The simple answer is he had to have volunteered. He wouldn't have been transferred in the sense of being compulsorily moved. I reckon there was a notice on the unit notice board one day, and it said aircrew wanted, and he put his name forward.
They came streaming out of the 6th Division when it returned.
That's the real
They all volunteered. They couldn't wait to get here. It really, the enthusiasm and reading the letters and the diaries, they were so excited to be able to have that adventure. They didn't know what war was. Some of them had heard stories of their uncles, fathers, World War I, and their parents were reluctant for them to go, but many of them had just come out of the Depression years. Hardships were extreme, and that sense of adventure and to fly, that was what appealed to them. And it was only afterwards that
Well, he always had a
They
fear
don't
of
totally
heights.
disillusioned.
He had a fear of heights. That didn't explain to me
That's
why.
not unusual. That's not unusual. That's not unusual.
Doesn't make any sense. It just
Okay, and we have just time for our final question at the back there.
The Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne has got a wonderful Bomber Command exhibition. And one element of that exhibition is a show of the support crew, the 48 people that kept the Heavy in the air. Would the Bomber Command people like to comment on the relationship between those 48 people and the 7 in the crew?
Oh, look, it was so important. I can remember operational training, the sergeant who's in charge of our aircraft was just so intent that it should be right and everything ready for us. But the best bit of support was the WAF driving the van out to take us to the aircraft. You always felt very secure and warm, the presence of that female taking you away.
I felt a bit warmer when they came home.
Oh dear, we've run out of time. We will formally thank our panel in just a moment. Let's show our appreciation to each one. I'd like to call David Gardner forward, please, and Margaret Harefield on the stage. Just a small presentation to make, first of all.
Those of you who don't know Margaret Hadfield, she's won the Gallipoli Military Art Prize. She has about 22 paintings in her Gallipoli collection, 6 of which have just been in The Hague, in Turkey, in Villas Bretonneux. She's actually even painted Peter Stan. That's probably my least favourite one. She's been a finalist in the Gallipoli Art Prize, but she's one of the rare women in this country who actually paints scenes such as this, and she's an amazing artist. Thank you.
I just have a little print here. I would like to present to the museum here, the RAF Museum, which I'm really impressed with. I just like to spend some hours here. We're a bit busy tied up in here. But I really appreciate the passion and what's happening here. And this print is of the Bedunkt painting, of course. I want to just acknowledge Bedunkt is thank you. It's thank you from me and from Catherine as well. And it's in appreciation, particularly as my family are Dutch. And so that's why I'm involved. My family immigrated here after the war, and there are 9 Australians buried on my family's island of Terschelling who were washed ashore from Bomber Command. And I think that's partly why my family came all this way to Australia. But I hope this stays near the shop that the girls insisted perhaps it doesn't go in your office. But just in our appreciation for Dr. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Actually, one of the great addition to our ever-increasing art collection, we do actually pick up a bit of art every year from the Heritage Art Award, and things like this go a long way to tell the story. And that's what our job is here anyway, and I will put a plug in. It's been great seeing you this year, and hopefully that Marcus and his merry bunch of cowboys will come back again next year. But thanks very much for that.
And to formally close our conference, it's my pleasure to call upon the President of the WHP, Colonel Marcus Fielding. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure now to call this conference to a close. First and foremost, on your behalf, I'd like to thank all of our speakers. I think we've been blessed today with the range of their knowledge and the different subjects that we've touched on. We tried very hard to spread it out because you can become focused on one area of this particular campaign or another, so we hope we've given that justice. And for you, can I just say that we look forward to receiving your transcripts and your presentations, because one of the things that we very much pride ourselves on is making sure that all our conference proceedings are published. Now we've moved to the digital age, so we publish on our website, but our previous 3 conferences are there. Jason McGregor over here does a tremendous job in pulling it all together in terms of the preamble, each of the papers, and also some video, and in one instance some audio as well, which has never been put on the public website before. So I would encourage you to have a look at those, and then hopefully in a very short amount of time we'll get the proceedings for this conference up there. And it's very gratifying to know, because we do track the statistics, that people from all over the world look at those proceedings, and so it's more than just the 75 odd people in the audience, but we're putting information and knowledge and perspectives out into the whole world community, so that's terrific. And I thank you for making a contribution to that today. Can I also, on your behalf, extend a thanks to David Gardner and his team for being not only our partners today, but also gracious hosts. I think we've been a little surprised with the temperature. It wasn't quite this bad last year, but next year we'll improve again and bring blankets for everybody, as well as nice soft seats. So we will improve and get better and smarter every year. But David, thanks to you and your team, and I hope we can do it again. Last but very much not least, to Darryl Moran as the conference convener. Anyone who's put a conference together, I'm sure you can appreciate it takes a lot of effort to pull all the pieces, and I think that's he's done a tremendous job, 2nd year in a row, so we'll try and twist his arm and see if he's interested in doing it again in the future. And last of all, I'd like to thank all of you for passing the word about our organisation and what we do, and to come along here today and participate, and to get into that Q&A session. I know we tried last year to do it throughout the year, but the time just keeps on blowing out with each presenter, so we've tried a different approach this year, and hopefully you feel satisfied that you had the opportunity to not only talk to the speakers during the breaks, but to also ask any questions you might have at the end here. So I hope the format has been satisfactory. For those that aren't members, I would encourage you to join the organisation. There's some membership forms floating around, but we do have a fairly full program of activities, events and activities. After this, we'll start ramping up for a whole week's worth of activities up in Ballarat in April of next year, associated with that pre-World War I era, so all the colonial era, and Ballarat's got a tremendous history in that regard. So if you're Victorian, please have a look at our website and start having a think about coming up for that. But by all means, pass the word. And then next September, we'll be looking at the first shot fired in World War I, early August. And we're also going to jump forward to something a bit more contemporary and have a look at Interfed, which was the intervention into East Timor in 1999. So we are looking at covering quite a few different aspects of Australia's military history and heritage, so please come along with us. Last but not least, if you could drop these off on the way out, that would be much appreciated. And thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.